I always believe the strongest moments of a man's life are the quiet ones, when no one's watching, no applause, no stage lights. Just the man and the echo of his thoughts. It was one of those mornings in mid-October, unusually warm for the season. I was sipping my black coffee, seated on the back porch of our modest two-story house, watching the mist rise over the lake behind our property. Kristen was still asleep, or at least I thought she was. We had been married for 7 years. Not perfect, but nothing alarming either. We'd had our fair share of arguments, moments of detachment, the occasional cold silence that stretches too long, like a thin piece of string threatening to snap. But nothing had prepared me for what was to come. They say when your life begins to change, there's no trumpet sound, no warning signs flashing in neon. Sometimes, it starts with something as subtle as the absence of a kiss goodbye. That morning, Kristen didn't kiss me. She had always done that. Even if we fought the night before, even if I was half asleep, she'd lean in, place a soft kiss on my cheek, whisper, "Have a good day," and be gone before I truly woke. But that day, nothing. Just the sound of her car pulling out of the driveway. At first, I dismissed it. Maybe she was late. Maybe she was upset about something I said last night. But my mind, my overly methodical, engineer's mind, doesn't like loose ends. And that kiss was a loose thread begging to be pulled. I didn't go snooping. Not then. I'm not the jealous type. I believed. No, I knew. Trust was the foundation of our marriage. And I had built that trust like a man builds a bridge. Carefully. Strongly. One steel beam at a time. But then it started happening more often. The late nights. The muted phone calls behind closed doors. The abrupt ending of conversations when I entered the room. Again, nothing concrete. But everything. Off. As if our life together had subtly tilted on its axis. And then there was the dream. About 2 months into this silent shift, I woke up from a nightmare that lingered far too vividly. I had dreamed of Kristen standing in our living room, her back to me, talking to someone. A man, his face hidden in the shadows. She laughed, not the laugh she shared with me, but something different. Flirtatious, intimate. And then she kissed him. I woke up in a cold sweat. Dreams don't mean much, I told myself. But sometimes, they tell you what you're trying to avoid seeing. I began to take mental notes, not invading her privacy, just observing patterns. Her schedule had changed. She no longer came home directly after her shifts at the hospital. She'd say she grabbed drinks with coworkers, mostly the same name popping up, Marshall. Marshall Jones. I remembered him. A cop. We'd met him once at a community fundraiser. Charismatic, tall, confident. The kind of man who doesn't need to speak loudly to own a room. Kristen had said he was leading a hospital-police collaboration project, helping nurses and officers respond to domestic abuse cases. Harmless. Or so I thought. I began to grow used to the silence. It filled our home like fog. Soft, quiet, but impossible to ignore. And still, I said nothing. I held my tongue. Not because I was afraid of the truth, but because I wanted to be wrong. Until one evening, in the most mundane of moments, something cracked. Kristen's phone buzzed while she was in the shower. I never touched her phone. I still didn't that night. But the message flashed on the screen just long enough for me to read it. "You make me forget she's even in the picture. When are we having that drink again?" No name. Just a number. But it was enough. Enough to make my stomach turn and my coffee taste like ash the next morning. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Because I needed to be sure. I wasn't going to accuse my wife over a vague message. I had seen marriages implode over suspicion. I wasn't going to let mine become one of them unless I had the truth in my hand, cold and indisputable. But in that moment, standing in the kitchen, her phone still glowing on the counter, a slow and deliberate resolve began to take shape in my chest. I would find out the truth. And when I did, I would handle it with calm, with clarity, like a man who values his dignity more than his pride. Kristen came out of the shower that night wrapped in a towel, her damp hair clinging to her shoulders. She looked tired, but not the kind of tired that comes from a long shift at work. It was something else, an emotional drain, maybe, a fatigue of the heart. She didn't notice the shift in my gaze. I asked her how her day was, and she gave me the usual vague answers. A difficult patient, a late paperwork session, traffic. Her eyes flicked to her phone on the kitchen counter, the screen now dark. She walked over, picked it up, and slid it into her bag. I watched her carefully, nodding at all the right moments. I wasn't looking for cracks in her words anymore. I was studying her silences. That night, she fell asleep almost instantly beside me, her breath slow and even. I lay there with my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in lazy circles. I didn't touch her. I hadn't for weeks, though neither of us had said anything about it. Maybe she noticed, maybe not. The distance between us was no longer just emotional. It was physical. I started staying later at work under the pretense of deadlines. But really, I just couldn't stand being in that house when she wasn't there. Or worse, when she was, but still absent. A ghost moving through the same rooms, avoiding eye contact, speaking only when necessary. I told myself I wouldn't investigate. But then I remembered something, an old friend's advice from years ago. If you really want to know if someone is lying to you, don't listen to what they say. Watch what they do when they think you're not watching. So I started watching. Not following her. Not stalking. I had too much self-respect for that. But I began to pay attention in the small moments. The receipts left in her jeans pockets. The subtle change in her perfume. The way she no longer invited me to the hospital charity events she used to beg me to attend. One day, I picked her up from work. A surprise, I said. She seemed off balance, startled even, as she walked out of the hospital doors. For a brief moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Annoyance? As she got in the car, I asked, "Where's Marshall? Thought you said you two had a meeting today?" Her head jerked slightly, and she adjusted the seatbelt with more effort than necessary. "He left early," she said, looking out the window. "Didn't show up." I didn't press, just nodded and kept driving. But I knew from the security guard at the entrance, an old man who liked to talk, that Marshall had left just 15 minutes before Kristen. Together. That night, I made a decision. I was going to wait. Not because I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt anymore. That part of me had eroded. I was going to wait because I needed timing, leverage, precision. My wife was either playing a very dangerous game, or I was losing my mind, and I wasn't prepared to be wrong. What struck me most wasn't the possibility of betrayal itself, but how calm I remained. There were no screaming fits, no passive-aggressive comments. I played the role of the oblivious husband so well I began to scare myself. And all the while, Kristen continued drifting. She'd come home humming songs I didn't recognize, texting with a smile she tried to hide. Some nights, she'd wear makeup to go out for groceries. Others, she'd be too tired to talk, but not too tired to stay up for hours after I'd gone to bed. I waited, like a man watching the final ice melt before stepping onto the lake. And then one Friday evening, it happened. The moment that, in retrospect, confirmed everything. She walked in late, well past 11 p.m., wearing a navy blue blouse I hadn't seen before, her lipstick slightly smudged, her eyes tired but glowing. She froze when she saw me standing at the kitchen sink, the light above me casting long shadows. "You're still up?" she asked, her voice casual. "Yeah," I said, watching her closely. "Just couldn't sleep." She moved past me toward the fridge, but I caught the faintest scent in the air, not her perfume. A man's cologne. Something spicy. Foreign. One I didn't own. She opened the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water. Her hands shook slightly as she twisted off the cap. "Long day?" I asked. She nodded, not meeting my gaze. "Exhausting." I leaned against the counter and crossed my arms. "Did you see Marshall today?" She hesitated, a split second, but it was enough. Then she turned, her face composed. "No." "Why?" I smiled. No reason. But inside me, a quiet bell had rung. And I knew, absolutely knew, I was standing on the edge of something irreversible. The morning after that late-night conversation, Kristen acted as if nothing had happened. She prepared breakfast, eggs, toast, black coffee, her usual weekend routine. But everything about her felt rehearsed, too smooth, like someone trying to erase their own footsteps in fresh snow. I played along. We ate in silence, save for the occasional clink of cutlery. She made small talk about upcoming renovations at the hospital and the recent staff shortages. I nodded, offered short replies. Meanwhile, my mind wasn't on her words, it was on her hands. Her left hand, to be specific, where her wedding band used to sit. She hadn't worn it in 2 weeks. I hadn't asked. I knew she'd come up with some benign excuse. Hospital rules, skin irritation, something convenient. But the truth hung in the air between us, silent and obvious. She no longer felt married. Later that day, she said she was meeting a friend for brunch. No name, just a friend. I didn't ask who. I simply smiled, told her to enjoy, and watched her leave, wearing a dress I'd never seen before. I waited a full 10 minutes, then stepped into the bedroom and opened her closet. The hanger was empty. The tag from the dress sat on the floor near the trash can, a high-end boutique we never shopped at. A gift? That's when something strange happened. I laughed, not out of humor, but out of realization. This wasn't a sudden mistake. This wasn't one night of weakness. This was careful, ongoing, thought out. And yet, in all of it, I felt oddly steady. I spent the next few hours cleaning the garage, a task I'd been putting off for months. It gave me time to think, to reflect, to prepare. The truth is, betrayal doesn't always hit like a hammer. Sometimes it's a slow leak, drip by drip, day by day, until one day you find yourself ankle-deep in quiet resentment and realize you're drowning. When Kristen returned later that afternoon, she was glowing. Her eyes had that spark, the one I used to see after our first dates years ago. The kind of light no man wants to see on his wife's face when he knows he isn't the one who caused it. "How was brunch?" I asked, drying my hands from the garage work. "Lovely," she said. "I needed it." I watched her closely, then smiled. "I'm glad." That night, as she slept, I sat in my office with a pen and a small notebook. I didn't write accusations. I didn't spill my emotions. I made a list. What I know, what I suspect, what I need. It was logical, rational. Every bullet point helping me hold on to my composure. I was gathering emotional evidence, not for court, not for revenge, but for myself, for closure. I needed to see it all in one place, free of denial. Kristen, late nights, new clothes, deleted texts, sudden avoidance, changed passwords, no ring, new cologne, frequent mention of Marshall Jones. I wrote his name and circled it, twice. Then I closed the notebook and locked it in my drawer. There would be no confrontation. Not yet. Because while she thought she was building her new world in secret, I was quietly constructing mine, piece by piece. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. The next week was the same pattern. Detached affection. Sporadic tenderness that felt like obligation more than love. She called me babe once and then didn't call me anything for 3 days. Then one evening, something odd happened. We were watching a movie on the couch. Kristen sat close. Not too close, but enough. And when a romantic scene played, she reached for my hand. Her fingers felt cold. I turned to look at her. She smiled, that familiar, practiced smile, and leaned her head on my shoulder. For a moment, I let it happen. I even kissed the top of her head, the way I used to. But my heart didn't flutter. It didn't even stir. Because I knew it wasn't real. She was trying to anchor herself, or me, to something that no longer existed. And I wondered if that was guilt, or fear, or perhaps just habit. I didn't pull away. I let her rest there until she fell asleep. Then, slowly, I shifted from under her and went upstairs alone. In the solitude of our guest room, which had become my refuge in the past few weeks, I lay in the dark and finally admitted something to myself. I still loved her. Not blindly, not foolishly, but deeply enough to want the truth. And deeply enough to understand that love, when betrayed, must either die or transform into something else entirely. I wasn't sure which direction I was heading yet, but I knew the decision wouldn't be hers. It would be mine. Weeks passed. Quiet, calculated, heavy. I moved through life like a man preparing for winter, not because I feared the cold, but because I wanted to meet it on my terms. There was a kind of clarity in that. In knowing that, while everything around you is rotting, you're still capable of control. Kristen's patterns remained consistent, and that was the strangest part. She became too predictable. She had perfected the mask. Our routine was a fragile dance of pleasantries and polite distance, as if we were distant cousins forced to cohabitate out of convenience. But then something finally broke the pattern. It happened on a Thursday. She called me around noon, something she hadn't done in weeks, maybe longer. Her voice was warm, borderline flirtatious. "Hey, I was thinking," she said, "how about dinner out tonight? Just us. Somewhere nice." I stared at the phone, half expecting it to be a mistake. A misdial. A trap. "Sure," I said, keeping my tone even. "Where do you want to go?" She named a small French place downtown. Expensive, romantic. The kind of place we hadn't visited in over a year. I agreed without hesitation, and for the rest of the day, I played out every possible scenario in my mind. That evening, She came downstairs in a dress I hadn't seen in months, a pale emerald green that brought out the sharpness in her eyes. She even wore the wedding ring. I took it all in silently. Dinner was pleasant, unnervingly so. She asked about work, laughed at the jokes she used to ignore. She even reached across the table to touch my hand, her thumb brushing against my skin like we were newlyweds again. But I watched her eyes. There was something buried behind them. Not fear, not guilt, conflict. After the meal, we walked the long way back to the car, passing storefronts and late-night cafes. She slipped her arm into mine, and for a moment, I let her rest her head against my shoulder. But the moment was already gone before it began. When we got home, she kissed me. Not on the cheek, on the lips. Soft, tentative, a test. I kissed her back, gently, without hunger or hate, and then I pulled away. "Thank you for tonight," I said. She looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize. Maybe she had forgotten what it was like to be touched by someone who didn't want to own her, or chase her, or possess her, someone who simply saw her. Or maybe she wanted something else entirely. She went to bed early, claiming a headache. I stayed downstairs, seated in the dark with nothing but the low hum of the refrigerator to keep me company. I wasn't confused by her actions. I understood them completely. That dinner wasn't a rekindling. It was an apology, an unspoken offering to balance the scales. She was trying to come back to something, to test whether it still existed. But I wasn't sure if she was doing it out of remorse or necessity. The next morning, I noticed something odd. A jacket, hung inside the coat closet. It wasn't mine. And it certainly wasn't Kristen's style. Dark brown leather, heavier than anything she wore. It had a faint scent too, something woodsy, sharp, masculine. My heart didn't race. I didn't panic. I just stood there, studying it. The closet was rarely used. We kept our day-to-day jackets on a rack near the door. This closet? It was for storage, for forgotten things. So why was a man's coat there? I checked the pockets. Nothing. No ID. No keys. No receipt. Just a jacket. Like a ghost had been through our house and left a fingerprint. I closed the closet door, my hand lingering on the knob for a moment. And I realized something. She was getting sloppy. That dinner wasn't a peace offering. It was damage control. A diversion. A way to keep me emotionally off balance while she recalibrated her next step. She was trying to plug a leak. But she didn't know I was already under the floorboards, listening to the pipes groan. That day, I went to work like usual. Smiled at my coworkers, responded to emails. But inside, my thoughts were rearranging. The pieces no longer fit the story she had been feeding me. There was someone else in my house. Not physically, not lately, but recently enough that he left something behind. And I knew, deep in my bones, that it wasn't an accident. She didn't forget the jacket. He did. And now it was here, silent testimony to the truth I hadn't yet confronted. That night, I didn't mention it. I acted like nothing had changed, because the longer she thought I was blind, the easier it would be to see. The jacket remained in the closet for another week. I didn't move it, didn't mention it. I wanted to see what she would do. Kristen never touched it. Maybe she assumed I hadn't noticed it. Or maybe she thought I wouldn't dare say anything. That was her tactic now, pretend everything was fine until the lie dissolved on its own. But something had changed. I could feel it. The silence between us had grown heavier. Not hostile, just tense. Like the air before a thunderstorm. She was aware of something. Perhaps she could sense the shift in me. The patience that was no longer patient. The quiet that wasn't passive. She smiled more. Touched me more. The woman who had all but forgotten our marriage bed now lingered near me in the kitchen, trailed her fingers along my shoulders when I passed her in the hallway. Once, she even curled up beside me on the couch and fell asleep with her hand on my chest. I didn't push her away. But I didn't pull her close either. I was past the need for confrontation. What I needed was a complete picture. Not just suspicion. Not just signals. I needed the moment where doubt transformed into fact. The one thing she couldn't take back, couldn't lie her way out of. So I waited. And while I waited, I listened. It's strange how quiet people become when they think you're not paying attention. Kristen had started taking more calls in the garden. She would pace slowly along the edge of the lawn, her voice low, often turning her back to the house. I never tried to eavesdrop. I didn't need to. Once, I stood by the window with a cup of coffee, watching her speak animatedly into the phone. She gestured with her free hand, a rare expression of vulnerability. Then, without realizing it, she turned slightly, just enough for me to see her face. She was smiling. Not the kind of smile you give a coworker or an old friend. It was softer, warmer. A smile you save for someone who sees parts of you no one else does. I turned away before she could see me. That evening, while she was in the shower, I took a walk. I followed the sidewalk down to the lake trail, the one we used to walk together in the early years. The air was crisp, the sky overcast, hanging heavy with impending rain. As I walked, I thought about the man, not Marshall himself, but what he represented. He wasn't just a mistake. He was a choice. She had chosen to give him her time, her affection, her attention, things she had once offered me with devotion. And while I still hadn't seen them together, hadn't caught them in the act, the jacket, the phone calls, the late nights, they were pieces of a puzzle that no longer needed the box to be complete. When I returned, Kristen was in bed, reading. She glanced up. "You were out late." "Just a walk." Thinking. I met her gaze. A little. She studied me for a moment, then closed her book and set it on the nightstand. "You've been quiet lately." "So have you," I replied calmly. She looked like she wanted to say more, but didn't. Instead, she turned off the light and rolled to her side. I lay down beside her, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. A few hours later, I woke to the faint sound of the front door clicking shut. I slipped out of bed and moved to the window. Through the slats of the blinds, I saw her standing by her car, speaking softly into her phone. Then she got in and drove off. I didn't follow her. Instead, I returned to the bed and sat on the edge, staring at the floor. She hadn't taken her purse, just her phone and keys. No explanation, no note, no pretense of an emergency, just gone. It was nearly 3 a.m. She returned an hour later, moving quietly through the front door like a thief. I heard her shoes come off, her feet pad softly up the stairs. The door creaked open, then shut. She slid into bed slowly, thinking I was asleep. I wasn't. I lay there, my breathing even, my mind clearer than it had ever been. She had just handed me what I needed, not evidence in the form of text messages or photographs, but the proof of intention. The unspoken admission. It wasn't just about another man. It was about leaving me behind in the dark. A few days later, the tone of the household shifted again. Kristen started talking about the future. Not our future, just the future. She floated the idea of taking a short trip. "We haven't traveled in so long," she said one night, curled up at the foot of the bed with her laptop. "Maybe a weekend getaway." I said nothing. She went on, describing towns along the coast, inns with ocean views, hiking spots I knew she'd never cared for. Her voice was cheerful, too cheerful, like someone reciting lines from a play she hadn't rehearsed properly. I watched her smile. It was wide, perfect, a little too perfect. The kind of smile that tries to blind you just long enough to forget you're bleeding. "Sounds good," I said, and kissed her forehead. I think that threw her off. The next morning, I came down to find her already dressed, pacing the kitchen with a phone pressed to her ear. Her voice dropped the moment she noticed me. She quickly ended the call and forced a bright expression. "You're up early. I heard you talking." She blinked, then recovered quickly. It was my mom. We were talking about her dog's vet appointment. Her lies were getting faster, smoother. I poured coffee and sat across from her, pretending to scroll through emails. But I wasn't reading. I was listening, not to her words, but to the pauses, the hesitation, the emotional distance disguised as domestic routine. She was planning something. One afternoon, while folding laundry in the living room, she left her phone on the kitchen counter. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The screen lit up briefly with a message preview. "Let me know if you told him yet." Just an initial. That's all it said. But I knew. I knew because of the way her body had gone stiff when she noticed her phone glowing. She moved toward it quickly, too quickly, and the moment she read it, the color drained from her face. She turned to me. "I forgot I promised Susan I'd help her pick out paint today. Mind if I go?" "Sure," I said and smiled. She left 10 minutes later. I sat down on the couch, not angry, not sad, just still. It was like standing in the middle of a storm you've already survived. I no longer wanted answers. I just wanted the end. And I think she knew it. That evening, she came home with takeout. Thai food. My favorite. She lit candles, put on music, even poured us wine. We hadn't had a dinner like that in over a year. She tried to make it feel natural, like this was a spontaneous date night. But everything about it felt rehearsed. Her laugh was hollow. Her glances were calculated. Even the way she passed me the spring rolls, too careful, too generous. After dinner, she sat across from me and took a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you." I raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. She hesitated, then smiled, not a nervous smile, not a guilty one. It was something stranger, a smile of someone trying to convince herself the lie was kindness. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she said, "about how we've grown apart." I nodded. "We have." Her eyes flicked up, as if surprised by my agreement. "I just want us to be happy again," she said. "Do you?" I asked gently. She swallowed. "Yes, I do." The pause stretched too long. Her gaze shifted toward the hallway, toward her bag. I knew the note was in there. Or maybe a letter. Something she'd planned to give me, explain herself in writing. But she'd lost her nerve. And I wasn't going to give her the out. So I leaned forward, folded my hands on the table, and said, "Kristen, if there's something you need to tell me, now's the time." She held my gaze and lied. "There's nothing." I didn't press her that night. I just nodded, cleaned the table, and told her I'd be working late the next day. She smiled and said, "Of course," then leaned in and kissed me, deliberately. I kissed her back, and the bitterness of her dishonesty sank in like cold steel behind my teeth. The next evening, I didn't work late. I came home early. Kristen wasn't there. Her car was gone. No note. No message. The house was too quiet. I walked through it slowly, each step like walking through the memory of a marriage that had long since died. I passed the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, every corner familiar, every silence deeper than the last. Then I saw it. The jacket. It was gone. No explanation. No casual mention of a donation. No. I found something in the closet today. Just gone, as if it had never been there. She had tried to erase the evidence. But it was too late. That jacket was never the problem. It was the proof. And now, with it removed, all she had done was confirm that she knew I had seen it. She was cleaning the crime scene. That night, I lay in bed, alone again. I didn't wait up. I didn't want to watch her walk through the door with excuses written on her face. I just needed sleep. But sleep didn't come. The next morning, I found her in the kitchen making coffee. Her hair was still damp from the shower. She looked fresh, collected, like someone who had slept soundly in someone else's arms. She glanced up at me. "Good morning." "Morning," I said. We didn't talk much after that. She left early again, saying she had a long shift. I watched her walk to the car, keys twirling in her fingers. No kiss. No goodbye. Just like it had started. And that was when I realized the truth. She wasn't going to confess. Whatever plan she'd crafted in her head, to either phase me out gently or wait until I broke first, she was committed to it. She had convinced herself that silence was the more merciful path. And maybe, in her mind, it was. But I didn't need her to speak anymore. That weekend, I went to visit my mother. It had been a while. Too long, really. She was tending to her garden when I arrived, and her face lit up in surprise. We sat on her porch, drank sweet tea, talked about old family stories, the neighbors, the price of gas, everything except Kristen. Until she asked, "How's my daughter-in-law?" I hesitated, then gave her a tired smile. "She's doing well." Mom nodded slowly. Then her eyes softened, and she reached for my hand. "You're carrying something heavy," she said quietly. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She squeezed my hand and said, "When you're ready, you tell me. But whatever it is, I want you to know, I'm on your side." Those words nearly undid me. I stayed for dinner. We didn't talk about Kristen again. And when I drove home that night, I felt something begin to shift inside me. Not rage, not heartbreak, but resolution. Kristen was not going to end this story with silence. I would. Because there's something about betrayal that no one tells you. It doesn't just make you doubt your partner. It makes you doubt yourself. And I needed to know, once and for all, whether the man I still saw in the mirror was one who allowed himself to be deceived. It happened on a Sunday. Late morning. Sunlight pouring in through the windows, catching motes of dust dancing above the kitchen counter. A quiet day. Peaceful. Deceptively so. Kristen had just returned from the store. Or so she said. She carried in a paper bag of groceries, set it on the counter, and began unpacking. "I got your favorite," she said, holding up a jar of marinara sauce. "Thought I'd make pasta tonight." I nodded from the living room, pretending to be absorbed in a book. My attention was fixed on the subtle changes in her voice, her body language. She was trying too hard again. "Need help?" I asked. Nope, she called cheerfully. Just a few things. She left her phone on the table next to her keys. As she moved back and forth between kitchen and pantry, a message popped up on the screen. I didn't move toward it. I didn't need to. It was the ringtone that followed. A loud, upbeat chime she'd recently changed from the soft tone she used for everyone else. It rang again, then again, persistent. And when I glanced at the screen, one name flashed. Marshall Jones. She froze in the pantry. Her head turned slowly, eyes meeting mine across the room. There was a pause, a second too long. And in that silence, everything broke. The bag of groceries crinkled as she stepped back into the kitchen. She picked up the phone quickly, as if I hadn't seen it. Wrong number, she said quietly. I stood, walked toward her, calm, deliberate. Let's not do that. She blinked. Do what? Lie. Her throat worked as she swallowed. Phone still clenched tightly in her hand. I didn't. I saw the name, I said. I heard the ringtone. I've heard it before. You changed it recently. Just for him, right? Her lips parted slightly, then closed, then parted again. She couldn't answer. Not without confirming everything. I stepped closer. My voice was low, steady. Kristen, I know. Her shoulders slumped. How long? I asked. She looked away. It doesn't matter. It does to me. She hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, a few months. I nodded slowly. And the nights you left the house at 2 in the morning? She didn't speak. The phone calls in the garden? Still nothing. The jacket in the closet? That one hit her. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. I didn't mean to leave it. I finished. I know. I stepped back, giving her space. Her hands trembled slightly. Phone still clutched tight like it could save her. I wasn't going to tell you, she admitted finally. I kept thinking I could fix it, that I could come back. I raised an eyebrow. Come back. She nodded, tears welling up now. I thought I could choose. That maybe you'd never find out. And if you didn't, I could end it with him quietly, and we'd be okay again. The words hung between us like smoke. Then I said what I had waited months to say. I already knew. Her eyes widened. I've known for a while. The late nights. The shifts in your behavior. The distance. And yes, even the jacket. But I waited. Waited for what? For you to tell me the truth. She sank into a chair, the weight of it all finally pressing down on her. Why didn't you confront me? Because I didn't want a performance. I wanted honesty. Tears spilled down her cheeks. And now I want peace. We sat there in silence, the last remnants of our life unraveling between us. She looked small, broken, but not beyond reach. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, the woman I had loved, the woman who had deceived me, and the woman who now sat before me without any more lies to shield her. And finally, I said, I know. The days that followed were slower than I expected. Not heavy with drama, not filled with shouting or tears, just quiet. Still, Kristen didn't leave. I didn't ask her to. For the first time in months, everything between us was real. Awkward, uncertain, but real. She moved through the house differently now, like a guest unsure of her welcome. She asked before using the laundry machine. She made dinner, but left me a note instead of calling me to eat. She slept in the guest room without being told. There was no confrontation left, just consequence. One evening, we sat on opposite ends of the couch. The television was on, but neither of us watched. Her fingers fiddled with the edge of a throw pillow, her eyes unfocused. Then she said it. I ended it with him. I looked at her. I told him it was over. That I chose this. This? I asked, my tone neutral. She nodded. Us. You. Whatever's left. I didn't speak. There wasn't much to say. An ending was the least she could offer, the bare minimum to earn space in the same room again. But then she added, he didn't take it well. Said he didn't care if you knew. That much was clear, I said. He left his jacket in our house. A faint smile tugged at her lips, not from amusement, but from shame. I'm not proud of anything I've done, she whispered. I was lonely. I felt like I didn't matter anymore. But that's not an excuse. I could have talked to you. I could have asked for help. Instead, I made you invisible. Her voice cracked, and she looked away. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know it wasn't because I stopped loving you. That word, love, it hit harder than anything else she could have said. I stopped feeling loved, I replied quietly. That's not the same thing as not being loved, but it's just as painful. She wiped her cheek. I never stopped. Not once. I just lost the rhythm. And then I couldn't find my way back. I sighed and leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. You had other options. Counseling. Honesty. Even leaving. You didn't have to choose betrayal. She nodded. I know. The silence after that wasn't tense. It was just necessary. And then, slowly, like someone placing a fragile object on a table, I said, I've been thinking about something. She looked up. If we're going to move forward, and I'm not saying we are, not yet, it won't be because I forgot what happened. It'll be because I made a choice. Not out of weakness, not out of fear of starting over, but because I believe something good still lives in us. She said nothing, just listened. I'm not promising anything. Not tonight, not tomorrow. But if you want to rebuild this, then we rebuild it from the ground. No lies, no pretending. Her lower lip trembled. Do you still want that? I paused, then said, I don't know, but I want it. That was the first moment in months when her face softened without guilt. Her eyes didn't sparkle with manipulation or fear, just hope. And in that moment, I knew something else, something unexpected. Forgiveness wasn't about letting go of the pain. It was about choosing what to do with it. And for the first time, I wasn't holding it like a weapon. I was setting it down. Time didn't heal things. It just gave them space to breathe. Kristen didn't ask to come back to our bed. Not at first. She moved through the days carefully, respecting boundaries I never had to set out loud. She was different now, not in a way that sought pity or redemption, but in a way that suggested she finally saw what she had broken. I hadn't decided to stay, but I hadn't left either. There was a strange grace in our silence. It wasn't passive anymore. It was restorative. Quiet conversations returned. Not about what happened, those wounds had already spoken, but about simple things. Errands, dinner, work, weather. We began speaking like two people rebuilding a vocabulary they had forgotten. I kept waiting for the bitterness to return, but it never did. Not fully. Some nights, I would wake up and find her standing in the hallway, looking at our wedding photo on the wall. She didn't know I noticed. She never spoke about it, but I could tell by the way she stared at it, like someone mourning a home they once lived in. A few months later, I came home early again. She was sitting on the edge of the bathtub, holding something in her hand. A plastic test. White. With a single pink line turning to two. Her eyes met mine, wide and uncertain. I didn't plan this, she whispered. I didn't speak. Just walked over and sat beside her. Are you sure? I asked gently. She nodded, showing me the digital result. No ambiguity. I looked at the test, then at her, and said, okay. She blinked. Okay. I nodded again. Yeah. Kristen started to cry then, not out of fear, not out of guilt, but something deeper, something I didn't try to name. I just put my arm around her and let her shake. The months that followed were tender, cautious, deliberate. She began to show. I started joining her at appointments, not out of obligation, but because I realized something had shifted. This baby wasn't a bandage. It was a new chapter. And when he came into the world, screaming, wrinkled, eyes squinting at the light, I held him for the first time and understood something I hadn't until that moment. I could love again, not because I had forgotten what she did, but because the future wasn't built from pain. It was built from choice. We named him Thomas. She asked me one night, months later, as we lay side by side with the baby between us, why did you stay? I looked at her for a long moment before answering. Because you stopped lying. And I started healing. She nodded, tears rising again. I don't deserve this, she whispered. Maybe not, I said softly. But neither did I deserve what happened. And yet, here we are. She turned to me. Do you still love me? I thought about it. Not to be cruel, but because the answer mattered. I love who we're becoming, I said finally. And maybe that's enough. She kissed me then. A kiss that didn't try to fix anything or prove anything. It just was. Thomas stirred in his sleep, fists curling, lips parting in that way babies do when they dream of nothing and everything. And in that quiet moment, I felt something I hadn't in a very long time. Peace.